Is this the final downfall of a prince, or just the beginning of an even greater scandal? While headlines are once again dominated by Prince Andrew, a dramatic scenario is unfolding behind the walls of Royal Lodge. All signs point to Andrew Mountbatten Windsor having to leave his 30-room residence in Windsor. A residence that was once a symbol of royal security is now becoming the emblem of a historic fall from grace. For weeks, whispers have been circulating about what palace insiders have allegedly known for decades. Who is Prince Andrew? Not the decorated naval officer of the Falklands War, not the former Duke of York, but the man who, according to new revelations, is said to have humiliated staff, crossed boundaries, and disregarded internal structures. The man who was allegedly protected by Queen Elizabeth for so long that he finally snapped. At the center of this new wave of speculation is Paul Burrell, not an uninvolved commentator, not a tabloid speculator, but a man who served in the inner circle of the British royal family for over 2 decades. He was Queen Elizabeth II footman. He was King Charles II butler when the latter was still Prince of Wales. And above all, he was the closest confidant of Princess Diana, the Princess of Wales whose tragic death in 1997 shocked the world. Paul Burrell is considered someone who knows the system from the inside. His first book, A Royal Duty, sold millions of copies. Now he returns with The Royal Insider: My Life with the Queen, the King and Princess Diana. And this work, due to be published by Mobius in January, takes a direct look at Prince Andrew. What it describes goes far beyond the usual headlines. Burrell paints a picture of a man who, over decades, developed a sense of untouchability. According to him, this self-image was closely linked to his special relationship with Queen Elizabeth. Andrew, born in 1960 as the Queen's 3rd child, is said to have come into the world at a time when the Queen was more emotionally accessible than she had been to Prince Charles or Princess Anne. While Prince Philip was considered a strict patriarch, Burrell describes a dynamic in which Andrew found ways to circumvent existing protocols. In a strictly hierarchical system where even high-ranking royals adhere to formal procedures, Prince Andrew must have sought and gained direct access to the Queen, outside the established structures. This is precisely where the central thesis begins. Those who never experience boundaries may not develop a sense of consequences. And this pattern, according to the account, continued in Prince Andrew's behavior. Not as a one-off slip-up, but as a recurring pattern. The current situation reflects this potential long-term process. Since the controversial BBC interview with Emily Mless in 2019, Andrew has been in a gradual withdrawal from public life. At that time, he attempted to explain his connection to Jeffrey Epstein, an appearance that was internationally regarded as a PR disaster. Shortly afterward, he stepped down from public duties. But what initially appeared to be a temporary measure developed into a structural disempowerment. On October 30, 2025, Andrew was officially stripped of all remaining titles. King Charles II made this decision at a time when the monarchy was already under intense scrutiny. The name Prince Andrew is increasingly being replaced by the simpler designation Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Simultaneously, investigations came to light. The Metropolitan Police confirmed an ongoing inquiry into emails from 2011 concerning alleged instructions regarding Virginia Duffer's private information. Additionally, the BBC examined documents suggesting that confidential reports from a 2010 trade mission to Southeast Asia may have been passed on to Jeffrey Epstein. Andrew denies all allegations, but beyond the legal issues, another dynamic is unfolding, an institutional one. The Sun reported that a growing number of household staff are no longer obligated to work for Andrew, and some have already taken advantage of this option. In a system characterized for decades by loyalty and discretion, this would be a remarkable development. The Royal Lodge now appears less like a residence and more like a symbol of isolation. A place where the question of how far familial protection should extend and when institutional responsibility begins becomes increasingly pressing. The Andrew case touches not just one person, but the very foundation of the monarchy. How does a system deal with its own mistakes? How long can loyalty offer protection when public expectations demand transparency? And is the monarchy perhaps facing a new phase of self-correction? One thing is certain. The name Andrew Mountbatten Windsor no longer stands for privilege, but for scrutiny. The coming months could determine whether this is the final downfall or whether further revelations will follow. What does this case mean for the future of the British monarchy? And is public trust permanently shaken? Or is it in the process of being redefined? Why does an insider like Paul Burrell choose to speak so clearly now? And why does his new book target Prince Andrew at a time when the margin for error is already minimal? This is precisely where the second layer of this story begins. The question of credibility, timing, and institutional impact. Paul Burrell is no stranger to the world of the monarchy. For over 20 years, he was part of the inner workings of the royal apparatus. He began as a footman for Queen Elizabeth II, a position that meant direct daily contact with the monarch. Later he served King Charles II, then Prince of Wales. But his public prominence stems primarily from his close relationship with Princess Diana. Between 1987 and 1997, he was her personal butler, her closest confidant in the palace. This role made him a witness to the most sensitive chapters of Windsor's history. When Princess Diana died in Paris in 1997, Paul Burrell was one of the most visible figures surrounding the tragedy. His first book, A Royal Duty, became a global bestseller, selling millions of copies worldwide. For many, he was someone who, while possessing insider knowledge, nevertheless maintained unwavering loyalty. This is precisely why his new work, The Royal Insider, My Life with the Queen, the King and Princess Diana, feels so compelling. It is not the book of an outsider, but rather that of a man who was part of the system for decades. And this time, the focus isn't on nostalgic memories, but on structural problems with Prince Andrew at the center. Burrell paints a picture of a royal who, for decades, benefited from a protective shield that was stronger than any criticism. His core argument is not only personal but institutional. Queen Elizabeth II, he claims, shielded Andrew from real consequences through consistent leniency. This thesis raises far-reaching questions. Andrew was born in 1960, at a time when Queen Elizabeth had already been on the throne for several years. Unlike Prince Charles and Princess Anne, who grew up in a period of strict protocol, Andrew, according to Burrell, experienced a different dynamic. A mother who, with increasing experience, may have become more emotionally accessible. A father, Prince Philip, who, while considered disciplined, is said to have had a different effect on Andrew. Burrell's description of the internal structures is particularly sensitive. In a strictly organized court, there were clear channels for gaining access to the monarch. Prince Philip, according to the account, acted as a gatekeeper. But Andrew regularly circumvented this order. He sought direct access and apparently received it. This constellation could have, through implicit analysis, created a long-term sense of special status. When rules appear flexible and authority remains benevolent, a pattern may emerge and become entrenched. Burrell describes not a single instance of misconduct, but a recurring pattern of behavior that developed over years. In this context, his later treatment of staff also appears in a different light. If a member of the royal family experiences no perceptible boundaries for decades, their own behavior may go unquestioned. Burrell establishes precisely this connection, without direct accusation, but with a clear structure. Furthermore, the book's publication coincides with a period of heightened sensitivity. Since his accession, King Charles II has faced the challenge of modernizing the monarchy while simultaneously ensuring stability. Every new accusation against Prince Andrew is therefore not viewed in isolation, but as a burden on the entire system. The official reaction is also noteworthy. In response to inquiries about the book, the palace limited itself to a brief statement. No detailed denial, no counter-argument, just restraint. In a media age where every detail is analyzed, silence itself acts as a message. Add to that the timing, which coincides with ongoing investigations by the Metropolitan Police. Even though Andrew denies all allegations, parallel legal questions amplify public attention. This context lends Burrell's account additional urgency. But why now? Observers see this as potentially a turning point. Queen Elizabeth II is no longer alive. The familial safety net that, according to Burrell, functioned for decades, no longer exists in the same form. King Charles II has already demonstrated his willingness to make institutional decisions, even if they are painful for the family. This shifts the dynamics. Paul Burrell is publishing his book at a time when the monarchy is already undergoing a period of upheaval. His statements resonate with a public that is more sensitive than it was 20 years ago, and they resonate with a royal family caught in a balancing act between loyalty and reform. The crucial question, therefore, is whether this is a belated reckoning or the beginning of a deeper self-examination of the Windsor system. And how much can a single book change the perception of an institution that has been based on discretion for centuries? One thing seems clear. With the royal insider, Paul Burrell shifts the debate. The focus is no longer just on individual incidents, but on structures, dynamics, and long-term patterns. The narrative is changing from scandal to a systemic question. Will this book be remembered as a historical document or as a catalyst for further revelations? And what consequences might follow if other insiders speak out? Was it maternal love or a blind spot with historical repercussions? This is precisely the question that now inevitably hangs in the air, because at the heart of Paul Burrell's account is not only Prince Andrew, but above all the role of Queen Elizabeth, a role that could extend far beyond familial affection. Andrew was born in 1960 as the third child of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. By that time, the monarch had already proven herself on the throne for years. Prince Charles and Princess Anne had grown up in a period characterized by a strict sense of duty and clear hierarchies. The young queen had to consolidate her role, assert her authority, and represent the state. Emotional closeness, according to the prevailing historical view, often took a backseat to institutional demands in those early years. By the time Andrew was born, the situation had changed. The monarchy was more stable, the queen more experienced, and the family structures more firmly established. This is precisely where Burrell's analysis begins. He describes a mother who may have softened with her third child, not weak, but more human, more approachable, more patient. Yet this very development may have had unintended side effects. When a child grows up in a system normally based on discipline and distance, and simultaneously experiences a special closeness, a dynamic emerges that differs from that of the siblings. Prince Charles was considered the heir with enormous pressure to succeed. Princess Diana was described early on as dutiful and direct. Andrew, on the other hand, apparently occupied a middle ground, not the heir to the throne, but nonetheless privileged. Prince Philip played a special role in this structure. He was often perceived as a strict father and a defender of clear structures. According to Burrell, he acted as a gatekeeper in the palace. Access to the queen was regulated, even for close family members. Protocol was not merely a formality, but an expression of order. Yet Andrew is said to have repeatedly circumvented this order. He sought and obtained direct access to the monarch. This special status, the implicit interpretation goes, may have created a feeling of untouchability in the long run. When rules appear flexible and criticism is softened, the perception of one's own boundaries shifts. This is where the structural dimension begins. In an institution like the British monarchy, behavior is not only evaluated individually, but also symbolically. Every action of a senior royal has repercussions for the entire system. If internal corrective mechanisms fail, an imbalance arises. Burrell suggests that Queen Elizabeth II did intervene occasionally, particularly regarding Andrew's treatment of staff, but the fundamental dynamic remained. A single rebuke does not replace long-term structural change, and therein lies the crux of the criticism. Not the individual decision, but the pattern that has developed over decades. This perspective sheds a sensitive light on the late monarch. Queen Elizabeth II enjoyed worldwide respect for her discipline and sense of duty. She embodied stability in times of political and social upheaval, yet she too was a mother. And between public role and private responsibility, a tension can arise that is barely visible from the outside. King Charles II faces a different situation today. Unlike his mother, he reigns in an age of constant media transparency. Mistakes no longer remain hidden behind palace walls. Every accusation is discussed globally. Every decision is interpreted politically. The official stripping of Andrew's remaining titles on October 30, 2025, marked a turning point. It signaled that institutional stability takes precedence over familial loyalty. But it was also an indirect admission that previous safeguards were no longer viable. At the same time, ongoing investigations by the Metropolitan Police are increasing the urgency. Even though Andrew denies all allegations, they underscore the seriousness of the situation. In this context, Burrell's statements gain additional weight. They appear less like retrospective criticism and more like an attempt to explain internal dynamics. The central question, therefore, is whether setting clear boundaries earlier would have altered the course of events. And how much responsibility does a system bear that shields individual behavior for years? At the same time, caution is advised. Historical reflection must not be confused with sweeping accusations. Queen Elizabeth reigned in an era when loyalty and discretion were considered the highest virtues. Decisions were made within the context of their time. But that era is over. Today, the monarchy faces different expectations. Transparency, accountability, and institutional reform are no longer optional values, but societal demands. The Andrew case is therefore not viewed in isolation, but as a barometer of the system's adaptability. In other words, was Andrew the product of personal leniency or the result of structural weaknesses? And can an institution learn from its own mistakes without losing its historical identity? Future developments will show whether these questions remain theoretical or whether they lead to concrete reforms. Only one thing is certain: the debate about power, family, and responsibility is far from over. What really happened behind the heavy doors of Buckingham Palace? Were they merely rumors or a pattern of behavior that had developed over years? This chapter shifts the focus from family dynamics to concrete allegations that, according to Paul Burrell, caused unrest within the household. Burrell describes not an isolated incident of misconduct, but a recurring attitude. Prince Andrew regularly used a condescending tone towards employees. Staff were allegedly instructed to leave rooms abruptly. This kind of behavior is considered problematic in a system based on respect and protocol. Especially in the royal environment, where hierarchies are clearly defined, but professional courtesy is a fundamental principle. Such accounts are explosive. The reports of late-night events are particularly sensitive. According to Burrell, Andrew regularly organized social gatherings that lasted well into the night. For the staff, this meant extended working hours, last-minute rescheduling, and additional strain. In an institutional framework officially based on discipline and structure, this creates a tension between personal comfort and professional obligation. Burrell suggests that the situation occasionally reached a point where even Queen Elizabeth intervened. A direct rebuke from the monarch is considered an exceptional step within the royal system. Yet even this measure apparently failed to fundamentally alter the underlying pattern. Adding to this is the role of Sarah Ferguson. As the then Duchess of York, she too moved within the public sphere. Burrell describes her as part of a dynamic in which mutual validation fostered a culture of boundless freedom. When two people operate within a system without clear boundaries, a closed loop is created, according to the implicit analysis. Sarah Ferguson, whose official title is also no longer used, was long considered a figure caught between sympathy and controversy. Her past financial difficulties, her repeated public appearances, and her complex relationship with the royal family shaped her image. But in the context of the current debate, she appears less as a peripheral figure and more as part of a larger pattern. The staff's reaction is particularly noteworthy. The Sun reported that employees were explicitly told they were not obliged to work for Andrew if they felt uncomfortable. Such a statement is exceptional in the historical context of the British court. For decades, absolute discretion was paramount. Loyalty was not only expected but taken for granted. The fact that employees are now allowed, and in some cases do, to actively distance themselves indicates a cultural shift. It signals a reassessment of institutional safeguards. When even long-serving employees are no longer willing to serve a particular individual, a personal problem becomes a structural issue. At the same time, external developments are increasing the urgency. The Metropolitan Police are still investigating email communications from 2011 related to Virginia Giuffre. Even though Andrew denies all allegations, his name remains at the center of international attention. The BBC also examined documents that could suggest the possible leaking of confidential information from a 2010 trade mission to Southeast Asia to Jeffrey Epstein. These allegations are denied, but their mere existence intensifies public pressure. In this climate, Paul Burrell's statements gain additional relevance. They do not appear isolated but rather embedded in a chain of events that has built up over years. The pattern he describes is like background noise that is now growing louder. The central question is, how does an institution react when internal tensions become public? King Charles II already sent a clear signal by recognizing the remaining titles on October 30, 2025. Andrew officially no longer holds the status that protected him for decades. The title Andrew Mountbatten Windsor now represents a dramatic loss of status. But is that enough? Is the revocation of a title sufficient to address structural criticism, or is a deeper reform of the system that allows such dynamics to develop in the first place necessary? The Royal Lodge increasingly appears as a symbol of isolation. A building that once stood for privilege now seems like a place of distancing. Staff loyalty is waning, public patience is limited, and media scrutiny remains intense. Was it a gradual process or an avoidable oversight? And could the Andrew case be seen as a turning point in the history of the modern monarchy? The answers are still pending. But one thing is undeniable. Something has changed behind the palace walls, and this change is irreversible. The moment that changed everything didn't happen behind closed doors, but live on television. The BBC interview with Emily Mless in 2019 is now considered a turning point in the public perception of Prince Andrew. What was intended as an opportunity to contextualize his connection to Jeffrey Epstein developed into an unprecedented media disaster. The expectation was clear: transparency, contextualization, perhaps even remorse. Instead, the impression was one of distance, a lack of sensitivity, and strategic miscalculation. International media analyzed every detail. Body language, word choice, contextualization, everything was dissected. Within days, it was clear that this appearance had not helped to calm the situation but had deepened the crisis. Shortly afterward, Andrew officially withdrew from public duties. What was initially communicated as a temporary step evolved into a permanent disempowerment. Patronages were relinquished, military honors revoked, and public appearances discontinued. The title His Royal Highness increasingly disappeared from active communication. But the real turning point came later. On October 30, 2025, King Charles II made a formal decision. Andrew lost all remaining royal titles and honors. From that point on, only his commoner name, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, remained. No longer a Duke of York, no longer an official representative, no longer an active member of the royal family in the institutional sense. This decision was more than an administrative act. It was a signal to the public, that the monarchy was prepared to draw clear lines, even if it was painful for the family. Observers see it as a deliberate step towards stabilizing the system. The institution is meant to be stronger than any individual. Meanwhile, legal questions remained. The Metropolitan Police confirmed an ongoing investigation into emails from 2011, allegedly containing personal data belonging to Virginia Giuffre. Andrew denies all allegations. Nevertheless, the mere existence of such investigations increases public pressure. Added to this are BBC reports about the possible leaking of confidential information from a 2010 trade mission to Southeast Asia to Jeffrey Epstein. These allegations are also denied. However, in conjunction with the events of 2019, a picture emerges of constant crisis communication. King Charles II finds himself in a dual role. On the one hand, the head of state is responsible for the reputation of the monarchy. On the other, he is Andrew's brother. This tension is obvious, but the decision of October 2025 demonstrates the priority given to institutional integrity over familial loyalty. The changed attitude of the palace staff is also noteworthy. The Sun reported that employees are not obliged to work for Andrew if they feel uncomfortable. Such a rule would have been unthinkable decades ago. It signals a new sensitivity to internal dynamics and personal boundaries. Royal Lodge 1, a symbol of stability, is increasingly perceived as a place of isolation. Andrew lives there largely shielded from public life. Official communications are no longer conducted in the name of the palace. The institutional distancing is visible, but the story doesn't end with the removal of his title. The crucial question remains: is symbolic disempowerment enough to restore trust? Or will the monarchy ultimately be judged by its ability to make its internal mechanisms more transparent? Paul Burrell's book adds another dimension to this period. It is not merely a retrospective, but an analysis. If his account is accurate, the fall from grace was not sudden, but the result of years of dynamics. The interview with Emily Mless was then not the cause, but the trigger. Public perception has fundamentally changed. A member of the royal family, once considered a decorated officer, now represents a period of self-examination. The institution is reacting, but it is reacting under pressure. Was the BBC interview the inevitable moment of truth? Or could earlier, more open communication have prevented the escalation? And how long will the issue of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the agenda of King Charles II, continue to dominate? The path back to the official royal role seems closed, yet the shadow of the events remains. And with each new report, the same question arises. Has the monarchy learned from this crisis, or is the most difficult phase yet to come? Is Andrew Mountbatten Windsor today merely an isolated ex-royal? Or is the British monarchy itself facing a historic test? This question encapsulates everything that has happened in recent years, because the case no longer concerns just one person, but the very foundation of the institution, which is based on trust. The Metropolitan Police are still investigating emails from 2011 that allegedly contain personal data belonging to Virginia Giuffre. Andrew vehemently denies all allegations. At the same time, BBC reports about the possible leaking of confidential information from a 2010 trade mission to Southeast Asia to Jeffrey Epstein garnered international attention. These allegations are also denied. But regardless of the outcome of legal proceedings, public perception remains tainted. The symbolic level is crucial. On October 30, 2025, Andrew lost all remaining royal titles. King Charles II thus sent a clear message. The monarchy transcends individual failings. The name Andrew Mountbatten Windsor is now detached from official functions, military honors, and representative duties. But what does isolation mean within a system which for centuries thrived on familial unity? The Sun reported that employees are not obligated to work for Andrew. Some have already taken advantage of this. Such a development is more than organizational. It is cultural. It signals that loyalty is no longer unconditional. Sarah Ferguson is also part of this new reality. Her former role as Duchess of York is a thing of the past. The protective shield offered by proximity to the royal family no longer exists in that form. What remains is a period of reorientation, both for the individuals involved and for the institution. Paul Burrell's book, The Royal Insider, My Life with the Queen, the King and Princess Diana, acts as a catalyst in this context. It connects individual episodes with structural issues. If his account is accurate, Andrew was not merely the protagonist of individual scandals, but a product of a system that turned a blind eye for too long. Queen Elizabeth II is portrayed in this context not as weak, but as human, as a mother who perhaps acted differently than Monarch. Doch gerade dies menschliche Dimension wirft ein Heikelfrage auf, wo in det familiar Versorge beginnt institutionelle Verantwortung. King Charles II, regiert in einer Ära permanenter Transparenz. Jede Entscheidung wird global analysiert. Jede Zurückhaltung interpretiert. Die Aberkennung von Andrews Titeln war ein deutliches Signal. Doch bindet nicht die Debatte. Vertrauen entsteht nicht allein durch Distanzierung, sondern durch Nachvollziehbarkeit. Die Royal Lodge steht inzwischen symbolisch für einen Rucksack. Ein Ort, der einst verprivileged, wird mit Isolation assoziiert. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor ist nicht mehr Teil des öffentlichen königlichen Lebens. Doch der Schatten seiner Geschichte bleibt. Die große Frage lautet, kann die Monarchie aus dieser Krise gestärkt hervorgehen? Oder wird der Fall Andrew langfristig als Beleg für strukturelle Schwächen dienen? Institutionen jubeln, wenn es sich anpassen. Doch Anpassung erfordert Offenheit und manchmal unbequem Selbstkritik. Parallel dazu verändert sich die Erwartungshaltung der Öffentlichkeit. Diskretion aliengenigt nicht mehr. Transparenz wird eingefordert. Loyalität wird hinterfragt und die Rolle einzelner Royals wird neu bewertet. Der Fall Andrew markiert damit möglicherweise ein Caesar. Nicht weil ein Titelverlängerung, sondern weil sichtbar wird, dass selbst hochrangige Mitglieder der Royal Family nicht dauerhaft außerhalb institutioneller Verantwortung stehen. Wird es weiter Enthaltungen geben? Werden andere Insider sprechen oder stabilisiert sich das System durch die bereits getroffenen Entscheidungen? Dies Fragen bleiben offen. Eins jedoch ist klar. Die Geschichte von Andrew Mountbatten Windsor ist nicht nur ein persönlich Tragödie oder ein Skandal. Sie ist ein Spiegel für Macht, Schutzmechanismen und die Grenzen von Loyalität. Die Monarchie steht vor einer Wegebildung, Reform oder Rucksack, Transparenz oder Abschottung. Die kommenden Jahr werden sehen, welch Richtung eingeschlagen wird. Und die Vielheit ist genau das die wichtigste Kenntnis. Nicht der Titelverlust allein entscheidet über die Zukunft der Institution, sondern die Art, wie sie mit ihren schwierigsten Momenten umgeht. Wird die British Monarchie dies Kreis als Wendepunkt nutzen oder wird sie weiter von ihrer Vergangenheit eingeholt? Was denken Sie? Ist dies das Ende eines Kapitels oder der Beginn einer noch größeren Debatte? Der Fall Andrew Mountbatten Windsor entwickelt sich von einem persönlichen Skandal zu einer institutionellen Herausforderung für die British Monarchie. Ausgangspunkt waren Enthaltungen über sein Verhalten gegenüber personal beschrieben von Paul Burrell in The Royal Insider My Life with the Queen, the King and Princess Diana. Burrell zeichnet das Bild eines Royal, der Überjahr von der schützenden Haltung von Queen Elizabeth II profitiert und dadurch möglicherweise ein Gefühl der Unantastbarkeit entwickelt. Das BBC-Interview mit Emily MLS im Jahr 2019 markiert den öffentlichen Wendepunkt. In der Folge zog sich Andrew aus offiziellen Aufgaben zurück. 30. October 2025 entzog King Charles II leverbliebenden Titel. Parallel dazu untersucht die Metropolitan Police E-Mail Communication im Zusammenhang mit Virginia Giuffre. Bericht der BBC über möglich Kontakt zu Jeffrey Epstein verstärkten die medial Aufmerksamkeit. The Sun berichtet zudem über angestellt, die nicht verpflichtet sein für Andrew zu arbeiten. Ein Zeichen kulturellen Wandels innerhalb der Hofstaats. Die Royal Lodge wird zum Symbol der Isolation. Sarah Ferguson verlor ebenfalls ihren offiziellen Status. Im Kern steht nicht nur die Person Andrew, sondern die Frage nach Verantwortung, Loyalität und die Reformfähigkeit einer Jahrhundert-alten Institution. Die Monarchie reagiert mit Distanzierung, doch die Debatte über Transparenz und die strukturelle Anpassung bleibt offen. Ist der Titelverlust das Ende der Kreis oder erst der Beginn einer umfassenderen Neubewertung königlicher Macht?